3-year-old toddler exposes mom's secret to daddy as soon as she started talking. Dad hires a private investigator. You wouldn't believe what he found. Let me take you back to 2 years ago, when my life started unraveling. We had a 3-year-old daughter at the time. I wasn't spending a lot of time with my daughter because of my busy work schedule, so I cherished every moment I spent with her. She was at that age when children start forming meaningful words. My wife was a stay-at-home mom, so she handled the majority of the parental duties. I worked 6 days a week because I had just gotten a promotion in a role I was underqualified for, but that was very financially rewarding. We had another baby on the way. Since my daughter started talking, it's been a blast spending time with her. She was a late bloomer and should have started talking earlier, but now that she speaks, you couldn't get her to stop, and I loved it. Hearing her speak reminded me why I go to work every day, to provide for my family. One Sunday evening, I was doing my favorite thing of the week, chilling with my daughter and watching a movie with her and my 6-year-old pit bull. My favorite moments were when she made commentary on what she saw on TV. If she saw a cat, she would mention my grandmother's cat's name. If she saw a dog, she would shout out the name of my pit bull. When she saw a person who looked like me, she would point at the TV and call out Day, her way of saying daddy. When she saw someone who looked like my brother, she would say uncle, and so on. This would go on until she got tired or fell asleep. Most PG-13 movies nowadays have some kind of romantic scenes, and I don't watch R-rated movies with my 3-year-old, but it's hard to find a movie without a romance scene. We were watching Wonder Woman 1984, which isn't much of a romance movie, a family-friendly movie I could watch with her. Watching a superhero with a woman as the main character, I hoped, would empower her as a girl and hopefully help improve her self-esteem as she grew up. Then came a romantic scene between Gal Gadot, the woman playing Wonder Woman, and Chris Pine. That's when things got interesting. During the romantic scene, my daughter goes, "That's Mama and Udo." She calls her mother Mama and calls me Day. But who was Udo? I thought maybe she misspoke. My family members visit often, and I had never heard her call anyone Udo before. I didn't know who Udo was. I thought about what she'd just said for a minute, then rewound the romance scene to see if she'd say Udo again. And sure enough, she said Udo again. I turned towards her and looked in her eyes, those beautiful, innocent eyes. I asked her softly, "Who is Udo?" And she pointed to the screen. It didn't make any sense to me. I thought she was pointing at God or something. I played a different movie that showed a romantic scene to see if I'd get the same reaction from her, and sure enough, my daughter said the same thing. Maybe she was trying to tell me something, but I had no clue what it was. Now, who was Udo? That was the biggest mystery to me at the time. Some people might say you can't trust children's memory or what they say, and I would normally lean towards that. However, this was around the same time I read a news story about a 3-year-old who remembered his past life and identified his murderer. Children can be quite an oracle, especially at that age. I knew it was a different story for mine. One was about reincarnation, and mine was in the present, but it had a profound effect on me, and I couldn't deny the eerie similarities in age and the fact that I had recently come across that story. It had me believing that children were oracles. It was surreal, and the greatest mystery was finding out who Udo was. I couldn't possibly ask my wife who Udo was, because she might lie about it. Back then, I trusted my wife with my life and didn't expect anything but honesty from her. A bit about my wife: she was born in the Middle East and came to America with her family when she was a teenager. She was raised Muslim. My parents also migrated from the same country as hers, but I was born in the US. We were introduced by family members, so we had a strong family link and support behind our marriage. We're both Muslims but not deeply religious. We observe all Islamic festivities and traditions and attend mosque on Fridays. My wife occasionally wears a hijab, loosely, and I don't tell her to do it. Frankly, I don't care. She does it of her own volition. She's 26 years old, and I'm 32. She studied psychology in college and was a high school teacher before we decided she would be a stay-at-home mom to raise the children when we started a family. I'm a young financial manager for a major bank. We recently moved into my current apartment 7 months prior because I received a promotion and had to relocate with a $40,000 pay bump. Now that we've gotten the background story out of the way, let's continue. I remember tucking my baby to sleep that night and still thinking about who Udo was. I never thought about confronting my wife because, quite frankly, it would be stupid to accuse her of something so serious with no evidence. Moreover, my wife was the best wife I could have asked for. She was as obedient as they come, cooked, and cleaned, and we had a healthy sex life, no red flags whatsoever. So why would I accuse her of having an affair with someone just because my daughter saw a movie scene and called out Mama and Udo? It seemed like a stretch, and I didn't know who Udo was. It might very well be a figment of my daughter's imagination. An accusation like that, once spoken, can't be unspoken. Next action item for me was to find out who Udo was. As much as I was tormented by the thought of my wife having an affair with Udo, the following day I forgot all about it and went about my day. Fast forward 2 months later, 9 months since we relocated to our new apartment, we were walking our dog at a community park next to my apartment. It was me, my daughter, my wife, and the dog. We came across a man walking his dog, coming from the opposite direction. The first thing I noticed was that my dog acted like he recognized the man's dog. Both dogs acted like they recognized each other. I tugged the leash when I noticed that my dog was running towards the stranger and his dog. I looked at my wife, and she was trying not to notice what was happening by avoiding eye contact and looking straight ahead. When my daughter saw the man, she called out, "Udo, Udo, Udo," calling him in the same way she'd call any of my relatives that she knew. But the man reacted differently, as if he didn't know her. He ignored us and kept dragging his dog along, looking away like a stranger, and acting like he didn't know any of us. I made eye contact with the man, gave him a polite smile, and he smiled back and kept on walking. It was such a strange experience that demanded an explanation. I felt that awkward energy around me. The chance encounter with this stranger lasted less than 5 seconds but felt longer. I looked at my wife again, and she looked straight ahead, pretending she hadn't noticed what had just happened. I asked her who that man was and if she knew him, and she said he was just an upstairs neighbor in a dismissive tone, like she barely knew him. I replied, "If he's just an upstairs neighbor, how did our daughter know his name?" She replied that the man had a habit of letting his dog off the leash, and his dog would come looking for our dog. She added that it had happened several times, and he liked saying hi to our daughter. It seemed like a reasonable explanation, right, except for one fan. Remember 2 months earlier when I was watching a movie with my daughter? She was playing a recognition game, saw 2 couples romancing, and called out, "Mama and Udo." The same Udo that my daughter had just mentioned, this stranger who happened to be our neighbor. 2 months ago, when I asked my daughter who Udo was, she pointed to the ceiling. Coincidence, right? And now my wife just confirmed to me that Udo is our upstairs neighbor. Coincidence? No, I think not. There is something going on here, and I am determined to find out what it is. My wife was acting weird and shady. I didn't think she would lie to me, and I've never caught her in a lie before, but something smelled fishy. We were unusually silent during the last leg of our walk after that chance encounter with the man I recognized as Udo. I kept thinking about the what-ifs, about how my life would be thrown upside down if my wife were indeed having an affair. I couldn't imagine her with another man, the thought was repugnant. I felt disgusted with her, even though the evidence was only circumstantial. Before we arrived back at our apartment, my wife noticed my awkwardness and asked me what was going on. I just said, "Nothing," keeping silent, deep in thought. When we got back to our apartment, I abruptly asked my wife the name of the man. She seemed upset and claimed she didn't know him. My abrupt question surprised her a bit. I could tell she knew I suspected something. But it wasn't time to confront her, it was time to gather proof. That was all I thought about the next day. When there's smoke, there's fire. I went online looking for answers. I found forums where I could document my story, share it so I wouldn't bottle it up, and maybe get support. Perhaps someone would tell me I was overreacting, about to destroy my family out of paranoia. The first thing I needed to know was the man's real name, to see if his name was truly Udo. Maybe Udo was his dog's name, and my suspicion would fall apart because Mama can't be romantic with a dog. Then, I'd know not to take my daughter's imagination too seriously. People on the forum suggested hiring a private investigator to find out the name of the upstairs neighbor, since I couldn't just steal his mail or follow him around due to my busy schedule. Taking time off work to follow him would be difficult, so hiring a PI seemed more convenient and less emotionally draining. I found a private investigator online who specialized in infidelity cases. I gave him the gate code to my apartment and shared my schedule with him. His first mission was to find out the neighbor's name, where he worked, his schedule, and what his relationship with my wife was. The first week of investigation was stressful because I had to act normal around my wife and go about my business like nothing was happening. I wanted her guard down so she wouldn't suspect anything, and I made sure to stay at work longer than usual. I tried not to resent my wife because we were still in the discovery phase, everything was still just speculation. After a week, I met the private investigator for a debriefing. He found out the man's full name. His first name is Hugo. I won't share his last name for privacy reasons. He's 36, a recent divorce with 2 kids in shared custody. His ex-wife got the house in their divorce, which is why he lives in our apartment building. He has a girlfriend, works out often, and is a logistics manager at a distribution company with multiple employees, mostly women, working under him. The private investigator came with a folder full of photos of my wife and daughter at the dog park, sitting on a bench with Hugo while their dogs played. The PI observed that their interaction seemed cordial, like friends. There was no touching, only laughing, with no signs of affection. Still, things didn't look good. My wife lied about not knowing him and not knowing his name, but here she was in several photos chatting with him. Now I had stronger reason to believe my daughter might have been right all along. Hugo sounds quite a bit like Udo. The disturbing part was the possibility that my daughter may have witnessed something inappropriate between them. It bothers me to this day. We've never even been affectionate in front of our daughter, let alone anything else. The private investigator asked if I wanted him to continue. I said yes and retained him for 2 more weeks. I wasn't sure what else I wanted him to find, but I hoped he'd uncover more. I didn't expect my wife to show public affection with him. It would only be in private, in either his apartment or ours. Still, I wanted to know more. During the next week's debriefing, the private investigator revealed that Hugo seemed to have multiple girlfriends. He saw him going out with 3 different women, 2 of whom worked for him, which could be a company policy violation. There was no new information about my wife, only that she occasionally met Hugo at the park with our daughter. By the 3rd week, I asked the PI to look into Hugo's other relationships. He found that one of Hugo's partners was married with kids, while the other 2 were single. This made me think Hugo was a scumbag, not just cheating but using his position at work to pursue relationships with his employees. And he was likely having an affair with my wife, too. The evidence of my wife's lie made me wonder if she was endangering my health by exposing me to potential STDs. Or worse, what if her pregnancy wasn't even mine? The private investigator suggested a hidden camera for our home. He gave me instructions on how to monitor it remotely. In the first week, I didn't see anything, no sign of Hugo coming to our apartment. The second week was the same. I wanted to give up before my wife found the camera, as she cleans every day. I could use the evidence I already had to confront her and at least pursue a divorce for emotional infidelity, though it was a weak case at best. They may be meeting at his apartment, in which case I wouldn't be able to capture anything, and it would be impossible to have a private investigator sit on the stairs of our apartment building watching my front door all day. I almost gave up hope, but I haven't come this far. I gave it 1 more week, then I hit pay dirt. I had mixed feelings watching it. I was sad and humiliated, and I felt that this 4-month ordeal was over. 11 months after we moved into my apartment, my daughter had been proven right. When my daughter told me about it 4 months ago, until now, I have finally caught her red-handed. Here's what I saw on camera. After I went to work, my wife went out to walk the dog with my daughter. After that, they came back home with Hugo. They all walked into my apartment with the dogs. Hugo was behind my wife, my daughter was in front of my wife. Hugo walked from behind her, hugged her from behind, rubbing her shoulders and kissing her neck. Then she turned around, and they started making out. The only thing that separated them was her 6-month pregnancy, which could be mine or Hugo's. With this final proof, all I needed to do was confront her. He didn't go further than kissing and touching. They separated, and he left. It broke my heart that this is how she paid me back after I made her a woman. I honored her, I respected her, I never laid hands on her or disrespected her. I provided her with everything she needed, and she couldn't hold her own commitment. She couldn't even give me exclusivity. She endangered my life by having an affair with a man with many partners, exposing me to life-threatening illnesses and endangering the life of the only breadwinner in the household. She acted like her dog and deserved everything coming her way. It was time to confront her. When I came home, I asked my wife what was going on between her and Hugo. She denied it and acted like she didn't know what I was talking about, but the fear in her eyes gave away what she was hiding in her heart. Her secret was no longer hidden. I showed her the pictures of the 2 of them in the park. That was when she admitted that she knew him but said she didn't want me to know because I might think they had something going on. She continued to lie, saying that they were just talking and swearing that nothing physical happened. Then I showed her the hidden camera. The cries and look of shock and embarrassment were clear. Initially, I wasn't angry or too emotional because I had exhausted my tears over the past 2 months. She lay on the floor and at my feet, begging me. I asked her how long the affair had been going on, and she said 2 months after we moved into the apartment. It's been almost a year since we moved in. I asked her how it started, and she said they met at the park and started talking. He claimed to be a fitness trainer and had a small gym set up in his apartment. He invited my wife to his apartment, and since she was bored at home, she went upstairs, and that's how it started, her words, not mine. Obviously, I am calmer now since it's been over a year since the confrontation took place, but the emotion is still raw, and I still feel the pain of my face getting dragged through the mud by this woman. Even to this day, I feel like people look at me with dirt on my face. There was a lot of crying on both sides, and she tried begging me not to divorce her, saying how much it would disgrace her and her family. I called her dad and mom in her presence and told them everything she had done. I was pretty sure her dad would punish her before I did if he got his hands on her, because she had disrespected his family as well. That's what I respect about the old school guys from back home. I told my wife that I couldn't allow her to continue to stay with me in my apartment. I couldn't kick her out that same day. Besides the fact that her name was on the lease, she was pregnant, even though the paternity of the baby was in question. I told her that she would be sleeping in another room until I rented her another apartment. I would pay for her apartment for 3 months while she looked for a job. After 3 months, she would be on her own. Many would want me to kick her out immediately, but it wasn't as easy as that. I needed her to look after my daughter until I got a babysitter. I couldn't afford to miss work or lose focus because I had a lot of responsibility. You see, at the time, I didn't know who the pregnancy belonged to, so it was a tricky situation. 2 days later, I found her an apartment and had her sign a divorce agreement. We didn't want to spend too much money, so we went through mediation. We were married for 5 years, and she was a stay-at-home mom for 4 years, earning significantly less than me when she was working. In the divorce agreement, I was supposed to pay her support for 1.5 years. She couldn't go back to her parents or her family members because she was ashamed of what she had done. Pretty much everyone who knew her knew why we got divorced. As for Hugo, we found out that the other woman had a boyfriend as well, so we sent proof of the affair to her husband, the husband of the co-worker with kids, and the boyfriend of the other woman who didn't work with him. All got copies of proof of their cheating. We also called the HR department and sent them the pictures as well. We didn't have to remind them that he violated company policy by being with his subordinates. Luckily, the company he worked for had a policy against that, and he was eventually fired. I have never spoken to Hugo before, other than a smile exchanged during the dog walk, but I was hard at work and spent thousands to ruin his life like he had ruined mine. After I was done with him, he was jobless and moved out of the apartment. I don't know if he knew I was the one pulling the strings, but I'm sure my ex-wife must have told him something. About 6 months after my daughter told me about Mama and Hugo, my ex-wife gave birth. Even though we didn't live together, I was at the hospital to see if the baby was mine. Hugo is Hispanic, and people in my country share the same complexion as them, so the baby could easily pass as mine. We decided to get a paternity test, and the result wasn't available until the next day. No one but me was there for the pregnancy, unlike with our daughter, where the whole village was at the hospital. As everyone had basically disowned her, her last few months of pregnancy were spent in regret and despair. I was the only one there, sensing the baby could be mine. She wanted me to have mercy on her, begging on her hospital bed and asking for forgiveness up until she went into labor. She was glad to see I was there. Well, I sent Hugo a letter from the hospital and told him he had a baby. And guess what he did? He never showed up. Months later, my ex-wife told me he only started coming when she put him on child support. My ex-wife is now working full-time and living a different life, making a high school teacher's wage. I don't know if you would call it difficult, but compared to her life before, I would consider it as such. I have full custody of my daughter, even though we have shared custody in the divorce agreement. I have a full-time babysitter because I don't want my daughter staying in her rundown apartment. I work hard for her to have a good life. Please hit the thumbs up for the algorithm to promote my video. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.